Hello, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Jeff Mendelson, and this is the One Big Tip podcast. My guest today is Mike Ravenscroft, Startup Success Manager at DreamIt, a growth program and venture fund for startups that are ready to scale. Mike is also the host of Extreme Uncertainty, a successful podcast about the challenges entrepreneurs face and how to deal with them head on. Mike's experience is in seed and Series A stage technology investments, as well as providing strategic consulting to venture backed startups. Mike has built investment strategies for venture backed accelerators and led equity and debt investments in companies across industries and global geographies. Join us today as we hear why being liked is an integral part of business and can help your startup gain the momentum that it needs. It's a lot of fun today. Mike, thank you so much for joining me and
Thanks so
welcome to.
much, Jeff, for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Yeah, so I really want to dive into this. It's like one of the I got to tell you, my wife and I are binging on two interesting series right
Okay.
now. One is We Crashed, right? The story about
Sure.
WeWork, and the other one is I forgot the name of it, but it's the one about Theranos with Elizabeth Holmes,
Right.
right? And we nerd out on this stuff all the time. We're the type of couple that like will sit down and scream at the TV during Shark Tank, things like that. So, what is really interesting is, we got on the topic coincidentally last night about the personalities, on how Adam Newman, for example, was the exact personality that needed to a co-working, this co-working group into this global phenomenon, right? It wasn't just about signing real estate deals. It was about community. It was about, making all this happen.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it was about being liked, right? It was that,
Yep.
he really needed the spotlight directly on him. So I really want to dive into this phenomenon with you.
Yeah.
And I want to start out, first of all, by asking you a little bit more about your background and how, like how you approach this, because I'm sure you get approached by a lot of people, and then, like as you're listening to these pitches, I'm sure that the likability factor has to be like, what the hell is this person doing?
Sure.
They're cut my veins boring type thing. So Mike, tell me a little bit about yourself
Sure.
and tell me a little bit about what it is that you do.
Yeah, I mean, the quick high level on me, I started my career in consulting, and then got into venture capital through a consulting project that my organization at the time was running for Department of Homeland Security. That's sort of where I learned about startups. I kind of got my teeth cut working with public safety facing startups, and then never really looked back. So I've been doing that for the last 6 years. In various capacities. So I've done seed stage investing. I've run a couple of accelerator programs, worked for a few venture funds. I've run my own business sort of as a venture scout, working for different funds. And then I've interned with, and I'm now employed by DreamIt Ventures, which is a health tech and cybersecurity or secure tech focused venture fund. So we're, two verticals, but laser focused on those industries. And most of what I do is in health tech. So, I kind of come to venture capital not through the founder route. I've worked with founders for the last 6 years, sort of in an advisory capacity, but I've never myself been a founder of a tech startup. I used to think that was something that might hold me back from being successful in this industry. It actually hasn't. I think there are lots of different types of personalities you need to have and backgrounds in order to make a successful venture fund or a successful team. I think that's true for companies as well when they're hiring. You need a diversity of inputs, a variety of backgrounds to be able to build, something that's not like a monochromatic or sort of a too focused solution or company. I think it helps to have a diversity of inputs. To your question, sort of about likability and sort of what my one big tip is, I think it's interesting. Over the last 6 years, I've sort of learned how to sort of, interact with founders and sort of understand their business models and get to know them as people. It's interesting that you led with the WeWork founder because very charismatic individual. Same with Elizabeth Holmes. But that's sort of the darker side of venture capital, I think, is that, at the end of the day, you are backing a person who needs to have a vision and be driven. But I think that, there's often things that kind of get overlooked when that's given the only priority, right? There were things that were wrong with both of those businesses that probably could have been caught earlier, and probably things with those founders that probably should have been screened out at an earlier stage, I would say.
You know what's So I want to ask you then. So when someone comes and pitches you guys, how, like, do you have to have that likability first, or do you give them the benefit of the doubt to kick into their pitch to see if there's any value there
Yeah.
first, or like how does like what comes first? Like the
Yeah.
likability or the actual business plan.
Yeah, I mean, likability can sort of cut both ways. I mean, so I think we all want to work with and back people that we like. It's very hard to kind of get super excited and passionate about something about somebody that you just don't get along with, or don't see eye to eye on, or that you think is maybe unlikable. And at a sort of base level, you want to like a founder, and a founder ideally is likable, because it's hard to build a company. Building a startup is probably one of the hardest things you can do in business, if not the hardest. And in order for all the things to go right that need to go right in order for a company to be successful, getting great advisors, building an outstanding team, raising capital, getting customers. If you're in the field that I'm in, healthcare, it's extremely challenging to engage with customers, to convince them of value, but then kind of get something through like a very complicated and lengthy sales cycle. So if at base, it's hard for people to kind of get on board and with your vision, and kind of feel like they want to get in the same bus as you to take this journey. It's really hard to do all those other things. And so, likability, when I sort of think about what it means to be likable, and why that can help make you successful, it's not just having people want to work with you. It's being willing to give back to others and to do for others, so that you can kind of create like a virtuous cycle among your network, and in other networks. I realized this was a piece of advice that my boss actually gave me, and he'd heard it from another VC, and another VC had told that person. So this is sort of like been passed down, but you should never underestimate the importance of being liked, because it really will pay dividends, and it's better to be liked than to be disliked. That sounds kind of trite and silly, but we often sort of think about, well, founders they have this vision and they're dedicated and they're passionate, and it doesn't matter if people like them, because and I don't think that's true. I mean, when I sort of think about what's helped me be successful, and what I've seen help make other founders successful, is being willing to do things like paying it forward. If somebody does you a favor, do a favor for somebody else. Being willing to make connections, make introductions, to take an hour out of your day to like give somebody feedback on their pitch, or on like on a product beta, or whatever it is somebody's looking for help with. I learned a long time ago. This is I don't know if you're a fan of The Wire, the TV show, but there's a character in The Wire who says that a wise man does not burn his bridges until he first knows that he can part the waters. I haven't met too many people who can part the waters. And so, it's like, it is better to be, to have good relationships with people. It is better to be liked. It is better to sort of, take, the slings and arrows in stride. Because I think ultimately that will pay off. When you're doing something that's as hard as building a startup.
One of the things that's interesting about what you're talking about is that why would a founder come to a company like yours, right? Maybe they have the vision, but they don't have the experience, right? Or maybe they have they have this great idea, or they came across some kind of patent that they have, which nobody else has, and that's where that's where they're trying to raise money in order to bring it to market.
Sure.
Now, in both cases, whether you're talking about building value for a company, customer acquisition, all that stuff, or trying to be a charismatic leader that can help, attract, the type of people and type of customers that you need, it would seem to me that in either case, both can be coached. Right. So, unless you're an absolutely abhorrent individual, with a brilliant business case, right? Okay. Maybe maybe that's an edge case. Right. But, in most cases, like, you can teach somebody how to present, you can teach somebody how to state your business case. And, conversely, on the value side, you can also help somebody refine, like, hey, maybe if you approach customer acquisition in a different way, or you made a 45-degree turn, to start going down this particular market, and, you niche down and you really hit, who you're trying to serve, both of which can be coached.
Right.
How does that look in your space, right? When you're talking with somebody, how can you, sort of ascertain what parts, what talents they already have, and and what parts do you need to train them on in order to make it a viable venture for you to
Yeah.
invest in?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of good questions in there. I mean, so like at its core, a lot of VCs talk about coachability. So coachability is kind of it can seem like sort of a nebulous term, but I always interpret it as a founder's open-mindedness and sort of willing to listen and hear ideas, and be I always use this quote from Jeff Bezos: "Be stubborn on the vision, flexible in the details." Like I think founders that are coachable are willing to make pivots when the market is telling them to make pivots, but to drive toward a vision that they have for solving a problem in whatever market it is they're targeting. But I think that coachability kind of comes back to this idea that you're just one person. Even if you're co-founders, you're just two people. You don't know everything and you can't do everything. Nobody can, right? So you have to be able to take advice where you can get it. You have to be able to bring people around you who account for and sort of help make up for a skill set that you don't have, a viewpoint that you don't have. I often look at advisory boards for companies, and I sort of ask the founder, how they built their advisory board. And if it's just these were the first 5 people that could cut me a check for $5,000 to help get the company off the ground, to me, that's not a very strategic approach for building your company. It's maybe tactical, but it's not very strategic. Founders that make the effort to go out and seek out advisors and are willing to bring people who have a lot of clout, but also their opinions matter in the space that the founder's operating in. That to me says that the founder has a vision, but they need help with execution, and they know that. And so I think that's one of the more important things that I certainly look for in teams that I want to help and that I want to back. As far as how we work with companies at DreamIt, so DreamIt's basic premise is that there's much more that you can do as a VC than just cut a check. So most of what I do in my role is I work with a network at this point of over 100 partners in healthcare. So it's mostly providers like large academic medical centers, hospital systems. We also work with insurance companies, so payers, and then pharmaceutical companies as well. And it's not a financial relationship. They're just in our partner network, and they look at our companies. They trust us sort of as an innovation scout for them to find companies for them that they should take a look at, because they have many problems. I mean, healthcare as an industry has never been under more strain than it is right now. Given everything that's happened in the last 2 years, and there are even issues that have been, much longer term that are just sort of now kind of coming to a head. The staffing crisis being the most obvious. But they're looking for startups to solve their problems because big companies aren't really innovating in the way that startups are. But it's very hard for a startup to work with an enterprise health system. They speak different languages, they operate in different world spaces, and they have very different expectations about what success looks like. Startups want to move fast, healthcare wants to move slow. And the same is true in a lot of industries where there's a lot of regulation, where there's a lot of potential downside to taking a risk on a startup. It's like if you try a new app at home and you don't really like it, well, then you can just delete it from your phone. Maybe you spent $5 on it, but that's a sunk cost. But for a healthcare system, if I'm going to bring something in that's going to interact with my patient data and is going to sit on my network and is going to deliver some kind of return for me, it better be good, it better be secure, it better work all the time, because my threshold for risk is very, very low. And so that's part of what we help founders understand and work through. And there's no silver bullet. We have a pretty good network, I think, of CIOs and CMOs who want to engage with startups, but there's no guarantees that what a startup's building is something that's going to resonate with a key decision leader at a healthcare system. That's part of why we do this, is to help us understand the market and how, what the market needs. And then also to help founders basically get an edge, skip the 18 months of business development that it would take to get in the room with the CIO.
Amazing. What a great answer. One of the I was wondering if you can give an example, maybe maybe not name names, right? But I was wondering if you can give an example of how that dynamic work. Where a founder comes to you, you take them on, and then you bring them into, you try to figure out which is the right fit for them.
Yeah.
With X, Y, or Z provider. How did that play out, and what was the net result with the value that your firm added, by making that introduction and making those investments and introductions?
Yeah, I mean, I'll sort of speak in generalities here a little bit, but we frequently have companies that are, they build a product to solve a problem that they saw, right? I mean, that's kind of like startup 101, right? It's like you were in an industry, you saw that something was broken, you decided to do something to fix it, and you built a company around it. And we will frequently have founders who are doctors, maybe nurses, who launch a tech company to solve a problem that they saw in their day to day lives, and that's great. I mean, that's a great place to start because you have credibility. You've got an understanding of the workflows that you need to cater to, and you have an understanding of maybe the technology piece that how you need to integrate into the EHR or other platform that a hospital might be using. The challenge is usually that there's always more than just the tree. There's always a forest when you're doing business development or you're trying to work with a hospital system. And so it's like you may have seen one part of that forest, but there's so many other things that also need to fall into place. And more than that, there's almost always sort of a twist on what it is that's really going to resonate in terms of value proposition. I used to think that VCs had short attention spans because it's like if you don't get a VC interested in the first 90 seconds of talking to them, it's very hard to get their interest back. Even if you got a full hour meeting, you're kind of trying to claw your way back into their like top of mind. You got to get them quick. And it's the same with healthcare. I think it's the same with any industry. It's like if you don't immediately address like a burning up at night issue that I know that I have, it's very hard for me to get interested in what you're doing because I'm talking about spending lots of money on this. It's going to be a lot of work for me working with a startup. There's a lot of risk to working with a startup. You may go out of business before we go live, if it takes us 12 months to implement. So it's like, if that problem doesn't outweigh all of those other things, it doesn't really work in the minds of the potential customer, like to move something forward. So most of what we do is help founders figure out what is the thing. Like, if you're sort of thinking about like in like terms of when you go to the dentist, it's like, yeah, I need to brush my teeth more, but this tooth here, I can't sleep. It's hurting me so bad. And we help them sort of pinpoint what exactly that part is that will really resonate. And then at least get you over that first kind of hump to getting to the next conversation, which is, I think, the hardest part.
What's interesting about what you're talking about here is, when you need to present these startups to these larger hospital groups, I would imagine you have different company cultures that you need to deal with. Whereas hospital group A would be very conservative, good old boys network, very regional, for example, and others would be more national, more open to change and innovation. How do you help the startups then navigate between those different cultures and to figure out whether they would be a good fit with group A versus group B?
Yeah, I mean that's so hard, and some of that is we have some insight based on what we know about the partners that we're working with, as far as we know that historically it's challenging for them to put anything into the EHR because it's such a big system. It takes a lot of work. They've seen lots of solutions that do something like this. It's really hard to rise above the noise. That's true for any industry. I think we can give color and context there, but to be totally honest, a lot of the time it comes back to the founder. A founder that I invested in a long time ago. He told me that the CEO's number one job is to be able to read conversations and understand where you are in the moment with a potential customer or potential investor or whoever it is you're speaking with, and to get a very quick read on receptivity, whether or not something's resonating, and being able to kind of cut through the first, second, third level chatter to really get to like the issue that's driving, their technology spend or whatever it is you're trying to engage with them on. And so, I think that's a lot of that just is sort of how the curveball breaks. I wish I had the answer. It would make my job a lot easier, but I don't think I do.
Reading people is, it really is an art, right? And whether you're just trying to read the room or you're trying to rise above the noise. I mean, it really is, part of maybe that part that you can't necessarily coach,
I think so.
right?
You
That
know,
you
what
do that
what
it factor, right?
Right. One thing I would say is sort of a general piece of advice for founders, particularly in an industry like health tech. I think a lot of founders who are technical, like highly technical, they will lead with their technology. They lead with, we've built the best NLP and AI solution that will automatically, read patient encounters and transcribe note. Like they'll kind of lead with the technology, but then they will sort of sidestep the real kind of value that this will provide to a customer. And like I always, a friend of mine who's a chief marketing officer for cybersecurity companies, he told me years ago. He said nobody wakes up in the morning, not even a chief information security officer, and says, "I got to get me some AI today." Like, people just don't think like that. So like a chief nursing officer wakes up in the morning and says, "I got capacity for 60. I got nursing staff to hit 60% of what I know that I'll need today. So I need to figure out how I could better allocate my resources so that I don't burn people out or risk having people lining up in the hallway to be seen." Right? It's like those are the things they care about. And so if you are leading your customer pitch with, "We got the best AI that does this," it's like you've already lost them. So that's what I try to tell founders too. It's like, the more you get your customer talking about their problems, the better chance you'll have at being able to resonate, because people want to be listened to. People, if you ask people what they need, they can maybe tell you like a couple things. If you ask them what's hard or what their problem is, they'll buy you a drink and they'll talk to you for 6 hours.
I love that advice. Make it resonate. And that's I think that's one of the key factors here is that resonating and listening and just being able to read what's going on, listen more than you talk, right? Is it's really key, and that's probably one of the better pieces of advice you can give somebody. Sounds so simple, but when you have big egos in the room and you have big projects that need to be closed and you have a lot of money on the table, sometimes those skills can be a little blurred. So
Absolutely.
I appreciate you pointing that out. Mike, can you please take a moment and let everyone know how they can learn more about your company and how they can reach out to you directly?
Sure. If you want to learn more about DreamIt, if you're a health tech founder or secure tech founder, you can go to dreamit.com/health tech or secure tech. We have an inbox and we are constantly fielding inquiries from founders. So, feel free to drop us a note there. I'm happy to share my email. It's Mike Ravenscroft at dreamitventures.com. Feel free to reach out to me. I always love engaging with founders, talking about pitch decks and things like that. Like I said, love to pay it forward. So, if I can be helpful for founders, I'm always willing to take a conversation.
I love it. Thank you for joining me today. This has been a really engaging conversation. I really appreciate you bringing the energy and really talking about, like the key skills that, founders need in order to make effective pitches. So I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Likewise, Jeff. It was